I am Maya Davenport, 32 years old, and the undisputed black sheep of my family. I represented myself in court today. My husband Marcus and his pregnant mistress Jasmine laughed so hard they had to wipe tears from their eyes. "You cannot even afford a real lawyer," Maya Marcus sneered across the aisle. "How utterly pathetic." Up in the gallery, my own mother, Vivian, my sister Chloe, and her wealthy husband, Preston, all sat nodding and whispering their agreement. To them, I was the family disgrace, the college dropout who was finally getting exactly what she deserved. I just sat there, my hands folded neatly, letting them enjoy their moment of triumph. But their laughter died instantly when the judge slammed his gavel, leaning forward with a look of absolute disbelief. He turned his attention to Harrison Davis, the high-powered attorney Marcus had hired to destroy me. "Mr. Davis," the judge said, his voice cutting through the dead-silent courtroom. "Are you playing some sort of game with this court? Do you seriously not recognize the woman sitting across from you?" I watched the blood drain completely from Marcus' face. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to smile through the pain while secretly plotting your comeback against a family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Buckhead, Atlanta as part of the Black elite meant that excellence was not just expected, it was ruthlessly demanded. My mother Vivian was a force of nature in our community. She was a prominent socialite, a dedicated member of her prestigious sorority, and a woman who valued image above absolutely everything else. Our sprawling 10-bedroom estate, with its perfectly manicured lawns and grand circular driveway, was less of a home and more of a stage for her endless performances. In her world, you were either a doctor, a lawyer, a business mogul, or you were a cautionary tale. From a very young age, it became abundantly clear which category I fell into. My younger sister Chloe was the golden child. She was loud, unapologetic, and effortlessly fit the mold my mother had created. Chloe pledged the right sorority, married Preston Kensington, an arrogant man from old money, and spent her days curating her life as a luxury lifestyle influencer. I was the exact opposite. I was quiet, observant, and preferred books over debutante balls. The real fracture in my family happened 10 years ago when I supposedly dropped out of college. The truth was, the pressure of living under my mother's microscopic scrutiny had become entirely suffocating. I needed to escape her constant control and the crushing weight of her expectations. So I did something drastic. I quietly transferred my academic records to Yale under a secret alias using my grandmother's maiden name. I wanted to prove I could succeed without the heavy influence of the Davenport family name opening doors for me. I graduated at the top of my class and spent the last decade working as a silent managing partner in corporate mergers and acquisitions. I became a legal ghost, orchestrating massive buyouts and controlling billions of dollars in assets from the shadows. The irony of it all was almost too heavy to carry. While my family sat around grand mahogany dining tables gossiping about my lack of ambition, I was the anonymous majority shareholder for the very investment firms they desperately tried to impress. I kept my two lives completely separate. During the day, I wore sharp-tailored suits and destroyed corporate rivals under my alias. At night, I washed the makeup off my face, put on a simple apron, and played the role of the devoted submissive wife to a man who thought he was smarter than everyone else in the room. When I married Marcus Sterling, my family thought I had finally done something right. Marcus was charismatic, ambitious, and building a financial technology startup from the ground up. My mother adored him. She saw him as the successful son she never had. For 10 years, I played the role of the invisible supportive wife. I cooked, I cleaned, and I stood quietly in the background at networking events while Marcus charmed investors. I let him take the spotlight. I let my family believe I was a dependent, uneducated housewife because it was infinitely easier than fighting their constant judgments. But behind closed doors, the reality of our marriage was a completely different story. Marcus was not the brilliant chief executive officer he pretended to be. He was reckless with money and constantly making poor business decisions that threatened to bankrupt his startup. I was the one who quietly fixed his mistakes. I was the one who stayed up late rewriting his flawed code and restructuring his business models. I poured my own secret wealth into his company to keep it afloat, always making sure the funds were untraceable. I did it because I loved him and I genuinely wanted him to succeed. As his company began to thrive, however, Marcus changed. He started believing his own press releases. He became arrogant, dismissive, and increasingly cruel. He would belittle me in front of our friends, joking that I would not understand his complex business world. My mother and sister encouraged his behavior, validating his inflated ego at every turn. They loved the power dynamic where Marcus was the savior and I was the grateful burden. Slowly, I began to see the true nature of the man I had married and the family I had tried so hard to appease. I noticed the late nights at the office, the whispered phone calls he took in the garage, and the expensive gifts he bought that never made it to my vanity. I knew he was having an affair long before the fateful night he decided to make it public. But I did not confront him. I did not scream or cry or demand answers. I simply went to my home office, locked the door, and began meticulously auditing his company. I secured my patents, solidified my holding company's grip on his assets, and prepared for the inevitable storm. That storm finally made landfall on Thanksgiving night. The air was crisp, and the tree-lined streets of Buckhead were packed with luxury cars as I pulled into my mother's grand driveway. I sat in my car for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, taking deep breaths to prepare myself for the passive-aggressive comments that were sure to come. Inside the mansion was practically vibrating with energy. 40 of Atlanta's most influential figures, pastors, local politicians, and my mother's sorority sisters were gathered for her annual holiday feast. The scent of roasted turkey, sweet potato pie, and expensive perfume filled the air. As I walked through the heavy oak double doors, I was immediately met with the judgmental stares of my own flesh and blood. My mother Vivian barely looked at me, simply gesturing toward the kitchen and telling me to go make myself useful before the real guests arrived. I walked into the grand dining room, feeling the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. The dining room was loud with the clinking of crystal glasses and the hum of pretentious networking. I took my seat near the end of the long mahogany table, quietly eating my dinner, forced to listen to my sister Chloe and her husband Preston. Preston never missed an opportunity to use his privilege to remind me of my place in the hierarchy. He took a sip of his expensive bourbon and leaned back in his chair, looking at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You know, Maya," Preston drawled, his voice loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear over the music. "I was telling Chloe that we might need a new housekeeper for our summer estate. Since Marcus is carrying the financial weight of your entire household, maybe you should consider taking the job. It would give you something productive to do besides waiting around for him to come home every night." Chloe giggled, adjusting her diamond necklace. "Oh, stop it, Preston. Maya is too busy pretending to manage a household. Let her enjoy her little fantasy. Marcus is the real genius of the family anyway." I simply dabbed my mouth with a linen napkin, ignoring the urge to tell Preston that I could buy his family's summer estate in cash, raze it to the ground, and build a parking lot without making a dent in my investment portfolio. I kept my face perfectly neutral, letting them enjoy their petty insults. I watched my mother at the head of the table, engaged in deep conversation with a local judge, completely ignoring the disrespect being hurled at me. This was the dynamic I had endured my entire life. But tonight, the atmosphere in the room was about to shift entirely. The dull chatter suddenly ceased as Marcus stood up from his chair. He tapped his silver spoon against his champagne flute, demanding the attention of the entire room. Everyone turned to look at the brilliant chief executive officer, expecting a heartfelt speech about family business success and holiday blessings. He adjusted his tailored suit jacket and looked directly down the length of the table at me. His eyes were cold, calculating, and devoid of any warmth. I felt a sudden chill run down my spine as he reached into his inner pocket. The performance was about to begin, and my life was about to change forever. Instead of a toast, Marcus announced, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling to silence the room, "I am filing for divorce." A collective gasp rippled through the guests. But Marcus did not flinch. He looked at me with an expression of pure contempt. "I am the chief executive officer of a rapidly growing financial technology empire." He continued, his voice laced with unearned arrogance. "I can no longer allow a college dropout, a woman content with doing nothing but playing house, to hold me back. My company requires a partner who reflects my ambition and my status." The heavy oak doors leading from the kitchen swung open. Jasmine stepped into the dining room. She was wearing a form-fitting emerald green dress that accentuated a very obvious baby bump. She walked with deliberate, confident steps right up to the head of the table. 40 pairs of eyes watched as she wrapped her arm possessively around Marcus' waist, resting her other hand on her stomach. "Jasmine is carrying the true sterling air," Marcus declared, his hand resting over hers. "It is over, Maya." The silence that followed was suffocating. I sat frozen, staring at the legal documents resting on top of my dinner plate. The bold black letters spelled out a petition for dissolution of marriage. My heart beat in a slow, steady rhythm. The panicked, desperate woman they all expected to see simply did not exist. I looked toward my mother, expecting at least a flicker of maternal outrage. No mother should watch her daughter be humiliated in front of her social circle and remain silent. But Vivian Davenport did not disappoint in her predictability. She set her crystal wine glass down with a sharp clink and let out an exasperated sigh. She walked over and gripped my shoulder, her manicured nails digging into my skin. "I warned you this would happen, Maya," my mother said, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "You refused to pledge the organization. You threw away your education. You have embarrassed this family for the last time. Do not make this harder than it has to be. Just sign the papers, pack your bags quietly, and leave Marcus in peace. Do not cause a scene and ruin my dinner party." I looked at Chloe. She was smirking from behind her wineglass, thoroughly enjoying the spectacle of my destruction. Preston chuckled softly, shaking his head, as if he were watching a highly entertaining reality show. They all looked at me with varying degrees of mockery and contempt. They expected me to break down. They expected me to cry, to scream, to beg Marcus to stay, to apologize for being inadequate. They wanted a show of brokenness, to validate their years of looking down on me. I calmly picked up my linen napkin and wiped a spot of gravy off the top page of the divorce petition. I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up, smoothing the front of my dress. I reached into my designer purse and pulled out a custom fountain pen encrusted with small, flawless diamonds. It was a $10,000 gift I had purchased for myself after closing my last major corporate buyout. I clicked the pen open, the metallic sound ringing out unnaturally loud in the dead silent dining room. I looked up and met Marcus' arrogant gaze. "Are you absolutely certain you want to do this, Marcus?" I asked, my voice completely steady, devoid of any emotion. "Are you sure you want to enforce the exact terms of our prenuptial agreement without any renegotiation whatsoever?" Marcus let out a harsh, barking laugh, shaking his head at my supposed stupidity. "Do not try to play smart, Maya. You have absolutely nothing. I am keeping my company, I am keeping the house, and you are leaving with exactly what you brought into this marriage. Nothing. I suggest you sign the paper before I make things even worse for you." I smiled. It was a small, knowing curve of my lips that made Jasmine shift uncomfortably on her feet. I pressed the diamond pen to the paper and signed my name with a smooth, elegant flourish. What Marcus, his brilliant public relations mistress, and my status-obsessed family did not know was the fatal flaw in his grand plan. The financial technology company he was so immensely proud of was built entirely on a proprietary source code I had written and patented 5 years ago. I owned the holding company that controlled all of his assets, his servers, and his intellectual property. With that single elegant signature, Marcus had just legally handed over 80% of his life's work directly into my hands. The morning sun cast a cold light through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the house Marcus and I had shared for a decade. I was in the master suite, carefully folding my clothes and placing them into a single leather suitcase. I did not bother packing the expensive jewelry Marcus had gifted me over the years, or the designer bags my mother had practically forced upon me to keep up appearances. Those items belonged to the submissive, uneducated housewife they all thought I was. I was only taking what truly belonged to Maya Davenport. The heavy thud of the front door opening broke the morning silence. Footsteps echoed up the grand staircase, loud and deliberately aggressive. I did not need to look up to know who had arrived. Chloe and her husband Preston walked into my bedroom without knocking, acting as if they had just purchased the property. Preston leaned against the doorframe wearing a tailored cashmere sweater and pristine Italian suede loafers. He possessed that specific brand of arrogance reserved for men who inherited their wealth rather than earning it. Chloe stood beside him, clutching a latte and looking around the room with undisguised distaste. "Marcus asked us to drop by and make sure you do not take anything that does not belong to you," Preston said, his voice dripping with condescension. "We are here to supervise your exit." I continued folding a silk dress, keeping my movements precise and unhurried. "I do not need supervision, Preston. I am only taking my personal clothing." Preston pushed off the doorframe and walked directly into the center of the room. He deliberately placed his suede loafer right on top of the silk dress I had just laid out on the bed, dragging his heel slightly across the delicate fabric. He looked down at me with a smirk that made my blood run cold. "Let us get one thing straight, Maya. You do not get to dictate terms here anymore. You are leaving this house today, and you are leaving quietly." He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a leather-bound checkbook. He uncapped a pen and quickly scribbled a number, tearing the slip of paper free and dropping it onto the ruined dress. I looked down at the check. It was made out for $10,000. "Take that and disappear back to whatever cheap apartment you can find," Preston said, crossing his arms over his chest. "Consider it a charitable donation from the Sterling family. Marcus is being generous. If you try to fight this divorce, my legal team will bury you. You are a black woman with absolutely no college degree and no real work history. My lawyers only need to snap their fingers and you will not see a single penny. You will be tied up in court for decades until you are bankrupt." I looked at the check and then back up at Preston. The sheer audacity of his privilege was almost suffocating. He truly believed his old money and his connections made him invincible. He had no idea that my silent investment firm had recently acquired the majority debt of his family's real estate portfolio. I could liquidate his entire inheritance before lunch, but I kept my face perfectly neutral. Chloe stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with malice. She picked up a framed photograph from my nightstand, an old picture of Marcus and me from our first year of marriage. She tossed it casually into the trash can. "Do not look so pathetic," Chloe sneered. "Did you honestly think working 3 miserable shifts at a diner to fund Marcus' startup was some great epic love story? You were nothing but a convenient stepping stone. He needed someone to wash his clothes and pay the utility bills while he built his empire. Now that he is at the top, he needs a woman who belongs there with him. Jasmine is a former beauty queen with a master's degree. You are just an embarrassing reminder of where he started." I let her words hang in the air, allowing them to believe their cruelty was breaking me. I zipped my suitcase closed and gripped the handle. "I do not want the money, Preston," I said softly. "I am leaving." As I walked toward the bedroom door, Preston noticed my car keys resting on the vanity. The silver Tesla logo gleamed under the overhead lights. He quickly stepped in front of me and snatched the keys off the counter, dangling them in the air like a prize. "Not so fast," Preston said, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. "Marcus bought this car with his company account. It belongs to the business. You can call a cab." I looked at the keys dangling from his manicured fingers. The Tesla was indeed registered to Marcus Company, a company that I fully controlled through my proprietary holding firm. The car was wired directly into my personal security network. "Keep it," I said, my voice devoid of any argument. I tossed him a spare keycard I had in my pocket. "I do not need it." Preston caught the card, looking momentarily surprised by my total capitulation before his arrogant smirk returned. "Smart choice," he mocked. "At least you know your place." I walked past them, rolling my suitcase down the hallway and out the front door. The crisp morning air hit my face as I stepped onto the driveway. Preston and Chloe followed closely behind me, eager to claim their spoils. Preston walked straight past me toward the sleek black Tesla parked in the driveway. He unlocked it with a chirp and slid into the driver's seat, running his hands over the steering wheel with obvious satisfaction. Chloe stood on the porch watching me with her arms crossed, waiting for me to begin my humiliating walk down the street to wait for a rideshare. I stopped at the end of the driveway and reached into my coat pocket, pulling out my phone. I opened the encrypted administrative application I had custom built for my holding company. I tapped a single command labeled Asset Lockdown. Preston pushed the start button on the Tesla console. The car did not silently hum to life. Instead, the dashboard screen flashed a bright crimson red. A mechanical voice echoed through the vehicle's interior speakers, stating unauthorized user detected. Asset freeze initiated. Before Preston could even reach for the door handle, the heavy lock slammed shut with a definitive crack. The windows rolled up automatically, sealing him inside. A deafening, high-pitched security alarm began to blare from the vehicle, tearing through the quiet suburban neighborhood. Preston slammed his palms against the reinforced glass of the Tesla, his face twisting into an ugly mask of panic. He yanked at the interior door handles, but the electronic locks remained completely dead. The high-pitched siren of the vehicle pierced the quiet morning air, an unrelenting shriek that immediately drew the attention of the surrounding neighborhood. Curtains twitched in the windows of the multi-million-dollar homes lining the street. Front doors opened as wealthy neighbors stepped onto their manicured lawns, their eyes locked on the chaotic spectacle unfolding in our driveway. Chloe dropped her designer latte. The ceramic cup shattered against the pavement, splattering expensive coffee across the pristine concrete. She spun around to face me, her features contorted with a mixture of confusion and sudden terror. "What did you do to his car?" she screamed, stepping toward me with her fists clenched. "Unlock it right now, Maya. You are going to suffocate him in there." I simply checked my watch, adjusting the cuff of my tailored blazer. "I did nothing, Chloe. I warned him that the vehicle belonged to the business. I do not control the security protocols for corporate assets." Before Chloe could unleash another string of insults, the blaring alarm of the Tesla was suddenly joined by a chorus of approaching sirens. The sound multiplied, growing louder and more intense, until a fleet of vehicles turned onto our exclusive street. 3 police cruisers sped toward our house, their tires screeching as they aggressively angled their cars to completely barricade the end of the driveway. Right behind the police cruisers, 2 massive, heavy-duty transport trucks rumbled into view. The side of each truck bore a bold, imposing logo that read, "Apex Asset Recovery." The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the morning shadows, casting a surreal, chaotic glow over the entire property. The ultimate nightmare for a family that valued social perception above all else was materializing right on their front lawn. A broad-shouldered police chief stepped out of the lead cruiser. He adjusted his utility belt and walked up the driveway with absolute authority, completely ignoring Chloe, who was currently waving her arms and demanding an explanation. The chief marched straight to the locked Tesla. He pulled a specialized electronic override device from his belt, pressed it against the door panel, and entered a quick sequence. The car doors unlocked with a sharp, heavy click. Preston practically fell out of the driver's seat. His cashmere sweater was rumpled and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. He stumbled, catching his balance against the side of the car, his face flushed purple with a potent mix of rage and absolute humiliation. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Preston shouted, pointing a trembling finger at the police chief. "My father plays golf with the mayor. This is private property, and this is my brother-in-law's vehicle. I am going to have your badge for this harassment." The police chief did not even blink. He raised a hand, instantly silencing Preston's entitled tirade. "Step away from the vehicle, sir," the chief ordered, his voice echoing with uncompromising command. "You are currently trespassing in a stolen corporate asset. This car is the registered property of Apex Investment Group." Preston sputtered, looking around wildly as if expecting someone to step out and announce this was all a terrible prank. Chloe marched over her heels, clicking aggressively against the pavement. She positioned herself between Preston and the officer, adopting the haughty, untouchable persona she used to intimidate retail workers and restaurant staff. "You are making a massive mistake, officer," Chloe snapped, crossing her arms. "That car belongs to Marcus Sterling. He is the chief executive officer of Sterling Financial Technology. He owns this house, he owns this car, and he can buy and sell your entire department by lunch." The chief reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents securely bound in a blue folder. He held the paperwork up, making sure Chloe and Preston could see the official federal seals stamped across the front page. "Marcus Sterling does not own this vehicle." The chief stated, his tone devoid of any sympathy. "He does not own the servers inside that house. He does not own the proprietary code he has been selling to investors." As of 8 o'clock this morning, Sterling Financial Technology is under active federal investigation for massive intellectual property theft and corporate fraud. We have a warrant to seize every physical and digital asset on this property, effective immediately. As the chief spoke, a dozen asset recovery agents dressed in tactical gear poured out of the transport trucks. They carried heavy-duty reinforced cases, specialized dollies, and professional packing equipment. They marched up the front steps of the mansion in perfect unison. Chloe shrieked and ran toward the front door, attempting to physically block the entrance with her body. She screamed that her mother would destroy their careers, that Vivian Davenport would have them all tied up in litigation for the rest of their natural lives. The agents gently but firmly moved her aside, stepping into the grand foyer to begin systematically dismantling the fraudulent empire Marcus had built. Preston stood rooted to the pavement. The arrogant sneer he had worn just 10 minutes earlier had completely vanished, replaced by the hollow, terrified expression of a man who realized his privilege could not save him from federal jurisdiction. Then his phone began to vibrate frantically in his pocket. Preston jumped, startled by the sudden buzzing. He pulled the device from his pocket, staring at the screen. The caller identification flashed Marcus's name. Preston's hands were shaking so severely that he accidentally hit the speakerphone button as he accepted the call. Marcus's voice blasted from the phone, stripped entirely of the unearned arrogance he had displayed at the Thanksgiving dinner table. He sounded completely unhinged, his breathing ragged and shallow, his words tumbling out in a panicked rush. "Preston, you have to get to the house!" Marcus screamed, the audio crackling through the phone speaker. "You need to get my servers out of the basement right now. Do not let anyone touch those drives. Break the windows if you have to, just get the servers out of the house." Preston stared at the phone in his trembling hand, then looked up at the police chief, who was listening to the entire exchange with cold professional interest. Marcus Preston stammered, his voice cracking. "The police are already here. They have a federal warrant. They are seizing the car. There are agents inside the house taking everything." "No!" Marcus roared, a sound of pure primal devastation echoing across the driveway. "You do not understand. Some ghost corporation called Apex Investment Group just froze all my banking accounts. The feds are raiding my downtown office right now. They are boxing up my computers. They are locking me out of my own administrative servers. They are telling me I do not own my own source code. Preston, they are taking everything." I stood a few feet away, watching the absolute destruction of the people who had dedicated their lives to making me feel small. I felt no pity, no remorse, and no hesitation. I reached into my designer purse and slowly pulled out a sleek, heavy black keycard. The gold-embossed logo of Apex Investment Group gleamed brilliantly as it caught the morning sunlight. I flipped the card casually between my fingers, letting the silence stretch out as Marcus continued to sob through the phone speaker. Preston's eyes locked onto the card. Then Chloe turned her gaze, dropping to the gold logo resting in my hand. The realization washed over them like a physical blow. The color drained entirely from Chloe's face, leaving her chalky and trembling. Her perfectly manicured hands flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp as the truth finally penetrated her thick layers of denial. Preston's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. The wealthy, untouchable heir was rendered completely mute, his brain unable to process the fact that the quiet, supposedly uneducated sister-in-law he had ruthlessly mocked was actually the architect of their entire downfall. At that exact moment, a midnight black Maybach glided silently down the street. It parted the sea of police cruisers and heavy transport trucks with a quiet, undeniable authority, coming to a smooth stop right at the edge of the driveway. A driver in a sharp-tailored suit stepped out quickly. He walked around to the rear passenger side, opened the door, and bowed his head respectfully. "Good morning, Madam CEO," the driver said, his voice carrying clearly across the driveway. I looked at my sister and her husband one last time. They stood shivering in the driveway, surrounded by the flashing lights of police cars and the wreckage of their shattered egos. "Tell Marcus that Apex Investment Group does not renegotiate its terms," I said softly, my voice carrying the absolute finality of a judge delivering a sentence. I turned and stepped into the luxurious leather interior of the Maybach. The driver closed the door behind me with a solid, satisfying thud, instantly shutting out the sounds of the sirens, the screaming, and the ruins of the Sterling family. As the Maybach pulled away smoothly from the curb, I looked out the tinted window, leaving them standing in the absolute wreckage of their own making. The Maybach smoothly navigated the winding roads of the hills before merging onto the highway toward downtown. I spent the ride reviewing the live feed of the asset seizure on my tablet. My screen displayed Marcus's empire being boxed up and cataloged by my agents. The sleek cars, the servers, the confidential files, everything he valued more than our marriage was now legally under my control. I arrived at the Apex Investment Group headquarters, which occupied the top 10 floors of the city's most prestigious skyscraper. My private residence was the penthouse level, positioned directly above the executive offices. It was a sprawling sanctuary of floor-to-ceiling glass marble floors and quiet luxury. I had purchased it under a blind trust 3 years ago, setting it up as my ultimate safe haven. Less than 2 hours after I settled into the quiet elegance of my living room, the private elevator chimed. My security detail in the lobby had standing orders to allow only one specific person up to the penthouse today. They had sent her up under the impression that this was merely my temporary rented apartment. Beatrice Davenport stepped out of the elevator. She marched into the penthouse, her heels striking the marble floor like weapons. She did not take in the panoramic views of the city skyline or the museum-quality artwork lining the walls. She did not notice the sheer scale of wealth surrounding her. Her eyes were locked exclusively on me, burning with a frantic, unhinged rage that distorted her normally perfectly composed features. Without a single word of greeting, without asking how I was holding up after my marriage had publicly imploded, she closed the distance between us. Her hand lashed out, striking my cheek with a sharp crack that echoed off the high ceilings of the vast room. I did not flinch. I slowly turned my head back to face her, tasting a faint metallic tang of blood on the inside of my cheek. "You selfish, ungrateful child!" Beatrice screamed, her meticulously styled hair trembling with the force of her fury. "Do you have any idea what you have done? You need to get back to that house right now. You are going to get on your knees, apologize to Marcus, and beg him to call off this divorce and stop this ridiculous Apex lawsuit." I touched my stinging cheek. My voice remained dangerously calm, a stark contrast to her hysteria. Marcus initiated the divorce, mother, and Apex is not a ridiculous lawsuit. It is a corporate repossession. Beatrice waved her hands wildly, completely ignoring my words. "You will fix this, Maya. You will tell Marcus you were hysterical. You will tell the police it was a misunderstanding. You will do whatever it takes to make him forgive you. If you do not stop this, my entire life is ruined." I watched the raw panic bleeding through her anger. Ruined how? Beatrice paced the hardwood floor, her breathing ragged and shallow. She looked at me with pure venom, blaming me entirely for a situation she had secretly engineered. "Marcus promised me a seat on the board of directors," she confessed, her voice shrill and desperate. "He told me that once Sterling Financial Technology went public, I would be a primary stakeholder. I would have more power and status than anyone in our social circle. All I had to do was provide the bridge capital he needed last month." Bridge capital. I repeated, feeling a cold realization wash over me. How much did you give him, Beatrice? Everything, she yelled, slamming her hands against her designer purse. I liquidated my entire retirement fund. I remortgaged the family estate. I even drained the National Sorority Endowment Fund that I manage as treasurer. It was supposed to be a temporary transfer. Marcus swore the returns would triple the accounts before the annual audit. Now his assets are frozen, and the sorority board is demanding an emergency financial review tomorrow morning. If those funds are not there, I will go to federal prison. I stared at the woman who had birthed me. She had sold out her own daughter's marriage and risked her own financial security just for a chance to sit at the table with the very man who had humiliated me. She used the money that was supposed to protect her old age and funds that did not even belong to her, just to elevate her social status. She had seen my failing marriage not as a tragedy but as a business opportunity. You helped him hide assets during our marriage, I stated simply. Connecting the final pieces of Marcus's sloppy financial puzzle, you funded his attempt to push me out so he could replace me with Jasmine. You are a college dropout, Beatrice spat, her face twisted in utter disgust. You were holding him back. He is a visionary. He needed a partner who understood high-level business, not a girl who played with computers in the basement. He was going to take our family to the very top. Now you have ruined it with your petty jealousy and your desperate need for attention. You are going to fix this, or I swear I will disown you. She raised her hand to strike me again. This time I was ready. I caught her wrist mid-air. My grip was like a steel vise locking her arm in place. Beatrice gasped, trying to pull away, but I held firm, forcing her to look directly into my eyes. The submissive, quiet daughter she had bullied for nearly 3 decades was dead, and I wanted her to see exactly who had taken her place. I am not fixing anything, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Marcus is bankrupt. He does not own a visionary company. He built a house of cards on software he stole from me. Apex Investment Group is my company. I own it all. Beatrice stopped struggling. Her eyes widened as the words slowly penetrated her panic. What are you talking about? She stammered. I released her wrist, roughly pushing her back a step. I turned to the sleek glass desk behind me and picked up a thick manila folder my legal team had prepared earlier that morning. I pulled out a copy of the private investment contract Marcus had drawn up for her. I turned back and coldly threw the piece of paper directly at her chest. It fluttered in the air before she frantically caught it. Did you even read the contract Marcus gave you carefully? I asked, my tone slicing through the room like ice. Did you have a lawyer review it? Or were you too blinded by the promise of a board seat to do basic due diligence? Beatrice stared at the paper, her eyes darting back and forth across the dense legal jargon. Her hands began to shake violently, making the paper rustle. Turn to page 4, section B, I instructed. Look at the asset allocation clause. She flipped the pages frantically, her manicured finger tracing the lines of text. I watched the exact moment her entire world shattered. The blood drained from her face, leaving her looking gray and incredibly fragile. Her mouth opened, but she could not draw enough breath to speak. Your name is not on the share certificate, I told her, driving the final nail into the coffin of her ambition. Marcus classified your money as an unsecured personal gift to him, not a corporate investment. He legally shielded himself from having to repay you or give you any equity whatsoever. He scammed you, Beatrice. He took your retirement, your house, and your sorority funds, and he left you with absolutely nothing. No, Beatrice whispered, the paper slipping slightly in her grip. No, he promised me. We had an understanding. He is my son-in-law. He was your son-in-law, I corrected. And he played you perfectly. He knew you cared more about status than you cared about your own daughter. He used your greed to fund his mistress and his lavish lifestyle. And now the money is gone. It has been seized by my company to pay off his fraudulent debts. Beatrice's knees buckled. The strength left her legs completely, and she collapsed onto the floor. The contract slipped from her fingers, scattering across the expensive rug. She stared blankly at the wall, her chest heaving as she struggled to pull air into her lungs. The reality of her situation, federal fraud charges, absolute poverty, and total social ruin pressed down on her like a physical weight, crushing the breath out of her. "Maya, please," she begged, looking up at me from the floor. Her voice was unrecognizable, small, pathetic, and desperate. "You have to help me. You said you own the company. You have the money. Please give it back. I am your mother. You cannot let me go to prison." I looked down at the woman who had watched Marcus humiliate me at a dinner party, who had told me to pack my bags quietly, who had slapped me just moments ago for inconveniencing the man who broke my heart. I felt absolutely nothing for her. "I am not the golden child, Beatrice," I said, smoothing the front of my blazer. "I am just the college dropout who embarrasses this family. I suggest you call your precious son-in-law and see if he can save you." I stepped over the scattered papers and walked toward the private elevator, leaving my mother sobbing on the floor of my penthouse. The private elevator ascended with a breathless silence, carrying me high above the chaotic streets. When the polished steel doors finally slid open, I stepped directly into the grand foyer of my $8 million penthouse in the heart of downtown Atlanta. The space was a masterpiece of modern architecture, featuring sweeping floor-to-ceiling windows that offered an uninterrupted panoramic view of the city skyline. It was a stark contrast to the stifling suburban mansion I had shared with Marcus. This was my true sanctuary, built entirely on my own terms and funded by a career my family never knew existed. I walked across the pristine marble floor, my footsteps echoing softly in the vast open-concept living area. I bypassed the custom furniture and the museum-quality artwork, heading straight for the master suite. It was time to shed the final remnants of the pathetic character I had played for the last decade. In the massive walk-in closet, I unbuttoned the conservative, understated blazer I had worn to confront my mother. I let it drop to the floor without a second glance. I reached past rows of muted pastel dresses and pulled out a razor-sharp, impeccably tailored black Tom Ford suit. The fabric felt like armor. As I slipped into the crisp white silk shirt and fastened the jacket, I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. The submissive college dropout wife was entirely gone. The woman staring back was the woman I had always been in the shadows. My encrypted secure phone buzzed from the marble vanity. I picked it up and accepted the call. "Good afternoon, Maya," my executive assistant Elias said, his voice crisp and professional. "I monitored the asset seizure at the Sterling property. The police and our recovery teams executed the extraction flawlessly. Marcus Sterling has been completely locked out of all corporate accounts, and his physical servers are currently en route to our secure holding facility." "Excellent work, Elias," I replied, adjusting the cuffs of my suit. "Ensure the forensic accounting team begins analyzing those servers immediately. I want every single hidden account and illegal transaction Marcus made over the last 5 years cataloged and ready for the grand jury." "Already in motion," Elias confirmed. "I also took the liberty of reviewing the updated background profiles for the upcoming litigation. I must say, looking over your academic and professional history again is always a fascinating exercise. The fact that your own mother and husband still believe you are an uneducated dropout is a masterpiece of misdirection." I smiled, a cold and calculated curve of my lips. Beatrice Davenport only saw what she wanted to see. 10 years ago, when my mother screamed that I was an embarrassment and threw me out of the house for allegedly throwing away my education, I had simply stopped fighting her suffocating control. I let her believe her own narrative. What she never bothered to investigate was that I did not drop out of college. I had quietly transferred my credits to Yale University. Knowing that Beatrice utilized her social connections and private investigators to monitor her children, I had legally registered under my maternal grandmother's maiden name. It was a ghost identity that allowed me to slip entirely under the radar of the Davenport family's obsessive surveillance. Under that name, I did not just graduate, I dominated. I finished as valedictorian of my law school class and immediately entered the ruthless world of corporate law. Over the past decade, I had built a reputation as an invisible but lethal mergers and acquisitions attorney. I orchestrated multi-billion-dollar hostile takeovers and dismantled corrupt corporations from behind the impenetrable shield of my holding firm, Apex Investment Group. Marcus had spent years lecturing me about the complexities of finance, completely unaware that he was sharing a bed with the very apex predator of the corporate legal world. "It was the only way to survive my family, Elias," I said, turning away from the mirror and walking back out into the sunlit living room. If Beatrice knew I possessed a Yale law degree and a thriving corporate firm, she would have found a way to exploit it for her own social climbing. By playing the quiet, inadequate housewife, I became invisible, and invisibility is the greatest advantage you can have when you are preparing for war. "Well, your invisibility cloak is about to be forcefully removed." Elias noted, his tone shifting to a more urgent cadence. "We just received a formal communication from Marcus's legal representation. He has retained Harrison Davis for his defense." I paused, looking out over the Atlanta skyline. Harrison Davis was a notorious bulldog in the legal community, known for aggressive, dirty tactics and a willingness to drag cases out for years until the opposition simply went bankrupt. Marcus must have promised him an exorbitant percentage of whatever assets he mistakenly believed he could salvage. "Davis just filed a formal pretrial mediation request." Elias continued, reading from the digital document on his end. "They are requesting an emergency sit-down tomorrow morning." I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, resting my hand against the cool glass. "And what exactly are they hoping to mediate, Elias?" "Marcus has absolutely no leverage. He is broke, his company is seized, and he is facing federal fraud charges." "That is where it gets interesting," Elias said, a hint of dark amusement creeping into his voice. "Davis is attempting a very aggressive and incredibly desperate legal maneuver. Since the public records now show that you are the sole owner of the Apex Holding Company, which technically owns the sterling financial technology infrastructure, they are trying to weaponize your ownership against you." I raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "They are drafting a motion to claim that since you are the legal owner of the corporate entity, you are personally responsible for the massive debts and fraudulent liabilities Marcus accrued over the last 3 years," Elias explained. "They want to force you to assume the entirety of the company's financial ruin. Davis's strategy is to threaten you with total personal bankruptcy. They expect you to panic and sign over the clean assets and the proprietary source code back to Marcus in exchange for him taking the debt back. They think they can bully the uneducated housewife into surrendering her empire." I let out a low, genuine laugh. The absolute arrogance of Marcus Sterling was breathtaking. Even now, stripped of his wealth and his power, he still believed he was the smartest person in the room. He actually thought he could use a high-priced lawyer to intimidate me into handing back the very weapon I had just used to destroy him. He fundamentally misunderstood both the law and the woman he had been married to. "He thinks I am going to cower in a mediation room and beg for a settlement," I said, my voice dropping an octave, resonating with absolute lethal intent. "He thinks Harrison Davis is going to intimidate me with legal threats." "That appears to be their exact calculation," Elias confirmed. "How would you like to proceed, Madam CEO? Should I have our legal department draft a standard rejection and push for an immediate trial?" "No," I said, turning away from the window. The sunlight caught the sharp lines of my suit, casting a long shadow across the marble floor. "I want to see the look on Marcus's face when he realizes exactly who he is up against." "Accept the mediation request. Tell Davis we will meet them tomorrow morning at their offices." Elias paused. "Are you certain? Walking into their territory gives them a perceived psychological advantage. Let them have their illusion of advantage, Elias. It will only make the fall that much more devastating." I walked toward my private office, running a hand over the polished mahogany desk. "Prepare the merger files. Dig up the exact shell corporations Marcus used to funnel my mother's retirement funds. I want every single piece of paper linking him to the fraud stacked and ready." "Understood," Elias said, his keyboard clicking rapidly in the background. "Anything else?" "Yes," I said, a cold smirk playing on my lips. "The game begins now." The sleek black Maybach navigated the bustling streets of downtown Atlanta with silent precision. I sat in the spacious rear cabin, reviewing the digital dossiers Elias had sent to my secure tablet. Every hidden offshore account, every manipulated tax return, and every forged signature Marcus had utilized over the past 5 years was now thoroughly documented and legally verified. I was not just walking into a mediation, I was walking into an execution. The vehicle pulled up to the curb outside a towering glass and steel skyscraper that housed the most ruthless corporate law firm in the state. Davis and Associates occupied the top 3 floors, an architectural monument designed specifically to intimidate opposing counsel and terrify vulnerable defendants. I stepped out of the car and walked through the revolving glass doors. The sharp click of my stilettos echoed across the pristine marble lobby. I ignored the security desk and the receptionist walking directly toward the private executive elevators. The heavy oak-paneled doors of Conference Room A loomed at the end of the long corridor on the 50th floor. I did not knock. I simply pushed the brass handles open and stepped inside. The room was vast and imposing, dominated by a massive polished mahogany table that stretched for 20 feet. The walls were lined with dark oak panels and shelves of leather-bound legal volumes, a calculated aesthetic meant to project absolute authority. They were already seated and waiting for me. Marcus sat near the head of the table. Despite the bespoke tailored suit he wore, the toll of the last 48 hours was painfully obvious. Deep purple circles bruised the skin under his eyes, and his knuckles were white as he gripped the arms of his leather chair. Yet when he saw me, he immediately attempted to arrange his face into a mask of arrogant superiority. To his right sat Harrison Davis, a man who looked exactly like his reputation suggested. He had the cold, dead eyes of a shark and a predatory smile that he used right before bankrupting his opponents. Directly across from Marcus sat the 2 women who had made it their life mission to break my spirit. Beatrice Davenport. My own mother sat with her posture rigidly straight, clutching a designer handbag to her chest. She was perfectly positioned as a hostile witness against her own flesh and blood, ready to testify to my supposed mental instability and financial incompetence. Next to her, lounging in a high-backed executive chair, was Jasmine. She was wearing a clinging silk maternity dress, deliberately chosen to accentuate her swollen belly, rubbing her hand over it in slow, continuous circles. Every head turned as I entered the room. I watched their eyes dart over my appearance. The soft, submissive housewife they expected to see, the woman who usually wore modest cardigans and kept her head down, was gone. The immaculate black Tom Ford suit I wore fit like tactical armor. The sharp lines of the shoulders and the flawless tailoring radiated a kind of dangerous power they were entirely unprepared for. Marcus blinked, clearly unsettled by the transformation, but he quickly masked his confusion with a scoff. Harrison Davis leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished mahogany table, and steepled his fingers together. Mrs. Sterling Davis began, his voice dripping with smooth, practiced condescension. I must admit I am highly surprised to see you walk through those doors alone. My office explicitly advised you in our communication to retain legal counsel for this proceeding. Walking into a mediation of this magnitude pro se without an attorney is incredibly foolish. However, if you wish to waive your right to representation, we can proceed. I pulled out the leather chair at the opposite end of the long table and sat down, crossing my legs elegantly. I am fully capable of speaking for myself, Mr. Davis, I said, my voice steady and perfectly modulated. I do not require a translator to understand what my husband is attempting to do here. Marcus let out a harsh, bitter laugh. Do not flatter yourself, Maya. You do not understand the first thing about what is happening here. You threw a temper tantrum and used some illegal backdoor glitch to lock me out of my own servers. You think playing hacker makes you a business genius. You are completely out of your depth. I simply stared at him, allowing the silence to stretch. Marcus hated silence. It made him nervous. Davis cleared his throat, drawing the attention back to himself. Let us cut to the chase, Mrs. Sterling. My client is willing to be remarkably generous today, despite the massive disruption you have caused to his corporate infrastructure. We are prepared to offer you a clean, swift exit from this marriage, without dragging your personal shortcomings through a messy public trial. He slid a thick leather-bound document across the smooth surface of the mahogany table. It stopped precisely in front of me. This is a comprehensive settlement agreement. Davis continued, leaning back in his chair with a smug, triumphant expression. As you are well aware, my client's company, Sterling Financial Technology, recently incurred a significant amount of unforeseen corporate debt due to market fluctuations. Because this debt was accrued during the timeline of your marriage, you are legally responsible for half of those liabilities. I looked down at the thick stack of paper. It was a masterpiece of legal fiction. They were actually trying to legally bind me to the fraudulent loans Marcus had taken out using my mother's money. The total liability you currently owe my client is roughly $4 million, Davis stated, stating the number slowly as if speaking to a slow child. However, my client is a reasonable man. If you sign over all digital access codes, relinquish any ridiculous claims to his intellectual property, and sign a strict non-disclosure agreement, he will graciously allow you to assume only 50% of the outstanding debt. $2 million, Mrs. Sterling. You will take the debt, and my client will allow you to walk away with your freedom. Beatrice leaned forward, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and vindictive anger. You need to sign that paper, Maya, she hissed across the table. You owe him this much for destroying his life's work with your jealous little stunts. You have embarrassed me for the absolute last time. You are going to take responsibility for your actions, and you are going to let Marcus rebuild his company in peace. Jasmine let out a soft, mocking sigh. She shifted in her chair, making a great show of caressing her pregnant stomach, her diamond rings catching the light from the overhead chandelier. She looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. Just sign it, Maya. Jasmine sneered, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. Let us be honest here. A woman who cannot even give her husband a child has absolutely no place sitting at a table making business demands. You failed as a wife, and you failed as a woman. Nobody out there is going to want a barren, useless housewife carrying $2 million in debt. If you fight this, Marcus will leave you homeless. Just take the deal and go hide somewhere. Stop making this so pathetic. Marcus smirked, nodding in agreement with his mistress. He looked at me, expecting to see the tears forming in my eyes. He expected to see my lip quiver. For 10 years he had used my fertility struggles as a weapon to break my confidence and keep me submissive. He truly believed that Jasmine's cruel words would be the final blow that would force me to capitulate. They all sat there staring at me, waiting for the inevitable breakdown, waiting for the tears, waiting for me to reach for the pen. I did not blink. My heart rate did not elevate a single beat. The psychological warfare that used to devastate me now felt like watching children play in a sandbox. I slowly reached forward and placed my hands flat on the thick settlement agreement. The room grew dead silent in anticipation. I gripped the edge of the heavy document. I did not bother to open the cover. I did not read a single line of text. With a sudden, sharp, and violently aggressive motion, I ripped the entire thick packet of paper straight down the middle. The sound of tearing paper and snapping binding echoed like a gunshot in the pristine quiet of the oak-paneled room. I casually dropped the two torn halves of the settlement onto the polished mahogany surface. I looked up and locked eyes with the predatory lawyer at the other end of the table. Mr. Davis, I said, my voice dripping with absolute lethal contempt. Did you write this garbage contract with your knee, because it certainly was not drafted by a competent legal professional? Harrison Davis stared at the torn pieces of paper as if they were a hallucination. The smug, predatory smile melted off his face, instantly replaced by a deep mottled crimson that crept up his thick neck. For a man accustomed to terrifying opposing parties into submission, this blatant display of disrespect was completely unfathomable. He stood up, placing both hands flat on the table, attempting to physically loom over me and reassert his dominance in the room. You are bordering on sanctionable behavior, Mrs. Sterling Davis barked, his voice echoing loudly in the enclosed space. You are a pro se litigant with absolutely no legal training. Tearing up a good faith settlement offer does not magically erase your liability. You were married to Marcus while these debts were accrued. Under state law, you are on the hook for 50% of his corporate failures. You can play tough all you want, but when we go before a judge tomorrow, you will be legally decimated. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms and studying him with clinical precision. It was almost disappointing how basic his strategy was. Do not cite basic marital property statutes to me, Mr. Davis, I said, my voice dangerously calm and echoing with absolute authority. You are attempting to shield Marcus's personal liabilities behind a corporate veil that I have already shattered. You claim these are corporate debts belonging to Sterling Financial Technology, but we both know Marcus treated that company like a personal piggy bank. Marcus slammed his fist on the table. "Shut your mouth, Maya," he snapped. "You do not know the first thing about corporate finance." I did not even look at him, keeping my eyes locked dead on his lawyer. Under the alter ego doctrine, I continued reciting the law with the cold mechanical precision of a seasoned litigator. The court will pierce the corporate veil if the corporation is merely a facade for the personal dealings of the owner. Let us look at the criteria, shall we? Undercapitalization, failure to observe corporate formalities, and my personal favorite, the commingling of corporate and personal assets. Davis froze. The angry flush on his face began to recede, leaving a pale, sickly pallor in its wake. His eyes darted to Marcus and then back to me, a flicker of genuine uncertainty crossing his features. "You see, Mr. Davis?" I said, leaning forward, resting my arms on the mahogany surface. "I have the complete forensic accounting report of Marcus's so-called business. I know exactly how he funded his lifestyle. He used corporate loans to pay the lease on a luxury condo downtown, a condo currently occupied by his mistress." I gestured dismissively toward Jasmine, who suddenly stopped rubbing her stomach and glared at me. "He used corporate credit cards to purchase her designer jewelry and to fund luxury vacations while claiming them as business expenses. That is textbook commingling of assets. The corporate veil does not exist anymore. These are not shared marital business debts. These are his personal fraudulent liabilities." Beatrice shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clutching her purse tighter. "This is ridiculous," she interjected, her voice shrill. "Marcus is a legitimate businessman. You are just throwing big words around to sound smart." I finally shifted my gaze to my mother. "And where exactly do you think he got the capital to keep this fraudulent enterprise afloat, Beatrice? He took your retirement savings and the sorority endowment funds you stole. But he did not put that money into Sterling Financial." I reached into my sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a thin black folder. I slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward Harrison Davis. "Let us talk about the offshore accounts," I said softly. Davis looked down at the paper. It was a wire transfer log. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. A bead of sweat formed at his hairline and began to slowly roll down his temple. "That is a transaction record from a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands," I explained, letting the reality of the situation suffocate the room. Specifically, an account ending in 8804. A shell company set up 3 weeks ago under Jasmine's maiden name. Marcus wired $2 million of my mother's money through a series of dummy corporations in the Bahamas to hide it from the upcoming asset seizure. Marcus went entirely rigid. The arrogance was completely wiped from his face, replaced by the stark, hollow terror of a man stepping off a cliff. How he whispered, his voice cracking. "How did you get those logs? Those are encrypted." I ignored him, keeping my attention laser-focused on the sweating lawyer across from me. "You are the registered agent for that shell company, Mr. Davis?" I said, tapping the paper. "You set up the accounts. You facilitated the transfer of stolen funds to an offshore location to hide them from a federal repossession. You did not just represent Marcus in a divorce. You actively participated in wire fraud and the concealment of marital assets. Those are privileged communications." Davis stammered, his voice dropping an octave entirely stripped of its former bluster. "You cannot use illegally obtained documents in a mediation. This is inadmissible. Do not insult my intelligence with claims of attorney-client privilege." I shot back, my voice sharp as a scalpel. "You know as well as I do that the crime-fraud exception completely invalidates any privilege when a lawyer's services are used to further a criminal act. Hiding stolen funds offshore to evade federal seizure is a federal crime." Jasmine looked back and forth between Marcus and his lawyer, her panic finally matching the rest of the room. "What is she talking about, Marcus?" she demanded, her voice pitching upwards. "Tell her to shut up. Tell her you are going to take the house." Davis was not listening to Jasmine. He was staring at the wire transfer log, his hands visibly shaking. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed at the sweat pooling on his forehead. The shark had just realized he was bleeding in the water. "If you attempt to file that fraudulent settlement agreement with the court tomorrow," I said, my tone dropping to a lethal whisper, "I will not just contest it. I will file an emergency injunction attaching this wire log. I will formally petition the state bar to have your license permanently revoked for your complicity in wire fraud and asset concealment. And when the federal authorities begin handing out indictments for where my mother's sorority funds ended up, I will make sure your name is right next to Marcus's on the docket." Davis swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He looked at Marcus with pure, unfiltered panic. "You told me she was a housewife." Davis hissed, his professional demeanor entirely shattered. "You told me she baked cupcakes and watched daytime television. You said she would sign anything if we threatened her with the debt." "I told you the truth," Marcus shouted, his composure finally breaking. He leaped out of his chair, slamming both fists violently onto the mahogany table. The impact rattled the water glasses. He pointed a trembling, furious finger at me, his face twisted into an ugly mask of denial and rage. "You are a stupid, uneducated housewife," Marcus roared, his voice echoing off the oak-paneled walls. "You dropped out of college. You spent 10 years making dinners and folding my laundry. You watched a few legal dramas on the internet and you think you can walk into a real law firm and play attorney. You are bluffing, Maya. You hacked my computer and found a bank statement, but you do not have the power to do anything with it. You are nothing without me." Before he could unleash another string of desperate insults, a sharp, vibrating buzz interrupted his tirade. Marcus's personal cell phone, resting on the table next to his clenched fists, lit up. The screen flashed, displaying an urgent priority message. Marcus glared at me, breathing heavily as he snatched the phone off the table. He swiped the screen open aggressively, clearly intending to ignore the message and continue his attack. But his eyes caught the first line of the email. He stopped. I watched as the remaining color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. His mouth fell open and his hand began to shake so violently that he nearly dropped the device. He read the message again, his eyes darting frantically across the screen, as if praying the words would magically rearrange themselves. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the ragged sound of Marcus desperately trying to draw breath. "What is it?" Jasmine demanded, leaning forward and trying to look at the screen. "Marcus, what is wrong? It is Vanguard Ventures." Marcus whispered, his voice nothing more than a hollow, terrified rasp. "They pulled out. They are withdrawing their entire $90 million angel investment. They cited a morality clause and a breach of corporate trust. They are demanding immediate repayment of their initial seed capital." He slowly lowered the phone, his eyes lifting to meet mine. The absolute horror in his gaze was intoxicating. He finally understood that he was not looking at a submissive wife playing dress-up. He was looking at the architect of his total destruction. I did not stay to watch the remaining color drain from his face. The absolute silence in the conference room was a testament to their collective shock, and I had no desire to bask in the pathetic ruins of Marcus Sterling's ego. I stood up from the mahogany table, buttoned my jacket with a single fluid motion, and turned my back on them. Behind me, the sound of Marcus hyperventilating and Davis frantically barking into his phone formed a chaotic, desperate symphony. I pushed the heavy oak doors open and stepped out into the hushed, deeply carpeted hallway of the law firm. The air out here was cool and pristine, entirely untouched by the panic radiating from the room I had just left. I walked toward the bank of private executive elevators, my heels sinking slightly into the expensive runner. Before I could press the call button, the conference room doors burst open again. Jasmine marched out, her breathing heavy, her face flushed with indignant rage. She practically jogged down the corridor to cut me off, planting her body directly between me and the elevator doors. She crossed her arms over her chest, forcing her posture to remain defiant, despite the frantic energy vibrating off her. The massive 5-carat diamond on her left hand caught the recessed lighting, glinting aggressively as she thrust her hand forward to ensure I saw it. "You think you won in there?" Jasmine spat, her voice trembling with a toxic mix of fear and unearned arrogance. "You think ruining his company changes anything?" You are just a bitter, barren ex-wife throwing a tantrum because you could not keep a real man happy. I stopped a few feet away from her. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked at her with clinical amusement, the way a scientist might observe a particularly aggressive insect trapped in a jar. "Move, Jasmine," I said calmly. "You are standing in my way. I am not moving anywhere," she snapped, stepping closer, her chin jutting out. "You think you are so smart with your little legal tricks and your stolen bank records? But you do not know Marcus. You do not know how his mind works. He is 10 steps ahead of you, Maya. He knew you would try something vindictive, so he made sure our future was completely untouchable." She rubbed her swollen belly, her lips curling into a triumphant, venomous smirk. "You see, while you were busy trying to steal his company, he was busy protecting his real family." She boasted, her eyes wide with manic superiority. "He transferred the title of the Buckhead Mansion entirely into my name this morning. It is legally mine. Not his, not the company's, and certainly not yours. You can seize all the corporate servers you want, but you cannot touch my house. I have the man, I have the baby, and I have the $8 million estate. You have nothing but a lonely penthouse and a pile of legal paperwork." I looked at the woman standing in front of me. She was so blinded by greed and her desperate need to win a superficial competition that she had completely abandoned basic common sense. She truly believed Marcus Sterling was a protective provider, a visionary who had secured her future. She had no idea that she was dealing with a coward who would throw anyone to the wolves to save his own skin. "You really believe he gave you that mansion out of love?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "He gave it to me because I am the mother of his child," Jasmine stated proudly, lifting her hand to flash the diamond ring in my face one more time. "Because I am his future. You are just the mistake he had to endure until he found me." "Kidichi guy." She mocked, her tone dripping with absolute condescension. "Sign the settlement. Take the debt. A woman who cannot even give her husband a child has no place in high society anyway. No one out there is going to want a washed-up, barren housewife." I let a soft, genuine laugh escape my lips. The sheer density of her delusion was almost impressive. I reached into my sleek leather briefcase to retrieve my encrypted phone. As I pulled my hand out, my grip intentionally loosened on a single officially stamped document resting at the top of my files. The thick, cream-colored paper slipped gracefully from my fingers and fluttered to the plush carpet, landing face up precisely between the toes of Jasmine's designer shoes. "Oh, my apologies," I said smoothly, not making a single move to retrieve it. "My hands are a bit full." Jasmine glared at me, refusing to break eye contact for a moment. Then, driven by an inherent paranoid curiosity, she glanced down at the paper. The bold red seal of the Internal Revenue Service was stamped clearly at the top right corner. Beneath it, highlighted in a stark yellow marker, was a formal notice of federal attachment. Jasmine frowned, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What is this?" she demanded, her arrogant posture faltering slightly as her eyes scanned the bold text. "That is a copy of a federal tax lien," I explained, keeping my voice light and conversational. "Specifically, it is a lien attached directly to the deed of the Buckhead Mansion. The very same deed Marcus so generously transferred into your name this morning." Jasmine froze. Her hand, which had been lovingly caressing her stomach, stopped dead. "You see, Jasmine, Marcus has not paid federal property taxes or corporate capital gains taxes on that estate in over 3 years. I continued, pacing slowly around her, forcing her to turn and listen to me. "He used the house as collateral for an illegal bridging loan. When my forensic accountants notified the IRS about his offshore shell companies yesterday, the federal government immediately placed a $2 million tax lien on the property." "That is a lie." Jasmine breathed, her voice suddenly sounding very thin and fragile. The color was rapidly draining from her cheeks, leaving her looking chalky under the harsh hallway lights. "He gave me the house. It is mine, free and clear. He promised me." "He gave you a ticking time bomb." I corrected, my tone devoid of any sympathy. "Marcus knew the IRS was coming for the property by the end of the week. If he held the deed when the federal agents arrived, he would be personally prosecuted for criminal tax evasion. So he panicked. He needed a fall guy. He needed someone naive enough, greedy enough, and desperate enough to accept a massive undocumented asset without having a lawyer check the title history. I stopped directly in front of her, leaning in slightly so she could hear every syllable clearly. By accepting that deed transfer this morning, you did not just take ownership of the house, Jasmine. Under federal law, the owner of record assumes full liability for all attached liens. You just legally accepted $2 million in federal tax debt. No, Jasmine whispered, stepping back as if the piece of paper on the floor had suddenly caught fire. Her hands began to shake, the massive 5-carat diamond trembling violently. No, he would not do that to me. I am carrying his baby. He loves me. Marcus loves Marcus, I stated, delivering the final crushing blow. He used you. He shielded himself from federal prison by making you the primary target for the IRS. If you do not write the federal government a check for $2 million by the end of the month, they will not just seize the house. They will freeze your personal bank accounts. They will garnish whatever wages you manage to earn for the rest of your life. And they will likely indict the deed holder for conspiracy to defraud the United States government. Jasmine's knees buckled slightly. She caught herself against the wall, her manicured nails digging desperately into the textured wallpaper. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, her chest heaving as the walls of her delusion came crashing down around her. The smug, untouchable mistress who had just bragged about her glamorous future was entirely gone. In her place stood a terrified, ruined woman who had just realized she had been nothing more than a convenient human shield for the man she thought she had conquered. "He set me up," she gasped, staring blankly at the wall, tears welling in her eyes and spilling over her perfectly contoured cheeks. "He set me up to take the fall. I do not have $2 million. I do not have anything." I pressed the call button for the elevator. The door slid open with a soft melodic chime. "You wanted my life so badly, Jasmine," I said, stepping into the sleek mirrored cab of the elevator. I turned around to look at her one last time as she slid down the wall, clutching her stomach in pure, unadulterated terror. "Congratulations," I added, my voice echoing coldly in the quiet hallway. "You have exactly what you deserve." The elevator doors glided shut, sealing her in the hallway with the ruins of her stolen future. 2 days later, the polished marble hallways of the Fulton County Superior Court felt less like a hall of justice and more like the VIP viewing deck of a country club. The high vaulted ceilings echoed with the sharp clicks of designer heels and the low buzzing hum of arrogant gossip. For my family, this was not a legal proceeding. It was a spectator sport. I stood in the shadowed alcove near the rear entrance of the courtroom, completely out of sight, watching the vultures gather. Chloe was holding court near the heavy oak doors of Courtroom 4B, holding a steaming cup of artisan coffee. She was wearing a blindingly bright fuchsia dress that was entirely inappropriate for a federal hearing, treating the corridor like a red carpet. A group of Beatrice's wealthy socialite friends surrounded her, clinging to her every word. "I give it 10 minutes!" Chloe laughed, her voice echoing shrilly down the corridor. "Honestly, I bet $100 she does not even make it past the opening statements before she is on her knees sobbing. She has no lawyer, she has no money. She is going to walk in here and realize that throwing a temper tantrum does not actually work in the real world." The group of women chuckled, murmuring their agreement. Standing slightly behind them was my mother. Beatrice looked like a ghost wrapped in Chanel. Despite the bravado she was projecting for her country club friends, her face was drawn, and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her pearl-handled purse. She was living in a state of frantic cognitive dissonance. She knew I controlled Apex Investment Group. She knew her money was gone. Yet she was so deeply conditioned to believe in the absolute superiority of men like Marcus that she had convinced herself this trial would magically fix her life. She needed Marcus to win. She needed the natural order of her superficial universe restored. She dabbed at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, playing the role of the tragically wronged mother. "It is just so devastating," Beatrice whispered to a sympathetic friend. "We gave that girl everything. We tried to elevate her, but she is just so deeply unstable. I only pray the judge is merciful when Marcus takes everything back." The heavy brass doors at the end of the corridor swung open, Marcus Sterling strode into the hallway flanked by Harrison Davis. Marcus was dressed in a pristine navy pinstripe suit, his hair perfectly styled, projecting the aura of an untouchable tech billionaire. He was trying desperately to look like a winner. He plastered a confident, arrogant smirk on his face as he approached the group, but I could see the subtle signs of fraying at his edges. His eyes darted nervously, and his jaw was clenched so tight a muscle ticked erratically in his cheek. Harrison Davis, however, looked visibly unwell. The shark-like lawyer who had tried to bully me in the mediation room was sweating through his expensive collar. He kept checking his briefcase, pulling at his tie as if it were choking him. He knew exactly what kind of evidence I possessed, and he knew that walking into this courtroom was professional suicide. But Marcus, arrogant and delusional, had clearly forced his hand. Preston stepped forward to intercept them. Chloe's husband wore a smug, self-satisfied grin as he clapped Marcus hard on the shoulder. "There is the man of the hour," Preston boomed, loudly enough for the entire corridor to hear. "You ready to put this nonsense to bed, Marcus?" Marcus puffed out his chest, adjusting his lapels. "It is a minor inconvenience, Preston. My legal team is just going to clean up the mess, and we will be back to business as usual by lunch." Preston let out a harsh, barking laugh. "Just let your lawyer grind her into dust, man." He leaned in slightly, but his voice carried the vile, undisguised bigotry that had always lurked just beneath the surface of his country club pedigree. People like her who try to step out of their lane always get put back in their place. Trash that does not share our pedigree belongs exactly where it started, right at the bottom of the barrel. Marcus chuckled, nodding in agreement. "Right at the bottom," he echoed. The bailiff opened the doors to courtroom 4B, announcing that the judge was ready. The crowd of socialites, family members, and arrogant onlookers filed into the gallery, taking their seats with eager anticipation. They were buzzing with collective schadenfreude, ready to watch the uneducated housewife be publicly humiliated and stripped of her delusions. I waited until the gallery was completely seated. I waited until Marcus and Davis had settled at the defense table, their backs to the gallery, projecting an image of total control. Then I stepped out of the shadows. I did not walk in alone. I pushed the heavy mahogany doors open, and the heavy thud of the wood striking the wall silenced the entire courtroom instantly. Every head in the gallery whipped around to the back of the room. I walked down the center aisle. I wore a bespoke charcoal gray suit tailored to absolute perfection, a stark contrast to the colorful, frivolous attire of my family in the gallery. My posture was rigid, my expression completely devoid of emotion. But it was not my presence that sucked the air out of the room. It was the vanguard marching perfectly in step right behind me. Four sharp, incredibly intimidating paralegals and junior associates from Apex Investment Group's elite legal division flanked me. They wore matching dark suits, moving with the synchronized precision of a military strike team. They were not carrying simple briefcases. They were pushing two heavy-duty, reinforced steel dollies. Stacked on those dollies were 20 massive banker's boxes. Each box was uniformly labeled, sealed with red evidence tape, and packed to the brim with thousands of pages of irrefutable financial destruction. It was the complete forensic accounting of Marcus Sterling's life. Offshore wire logs, dummy corporation filings, hidden bank accounts, and stolen intellectual property records. The rhythmic, heavy rumble of the rubber dolly wheels rolling across the hardwood floor sounded like a drumbeat of impending doom. The arrogant smirks instantly melted off the faces of Chloe and Preston. Chloe's mouth fell open, her eyes darting from the mountain of evidence to my perfectly calm face. In the second row, Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her throat as the sheer scale of the operation materialized in front of her. At the defense table, Harrison Davis turned around. All the remaining color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. He recognized the red evidence tape. He knew exactly what was inside those boxes. Marcus turned slowly, his chair squeaking in the dead silence of the courtroom. His eyes locked onto the four associates. He looked at the towering stacks of reinforced boxes that were currently being wheeled directly toward the plaintiff's table. Then his eyes met mine. The fake confidence he had been projecting in the hallway evaporated in a single devastating second. The arrogant sneer collapsed. For the first time since the day I met him, Marcus Sterling looked small. He looked terrified. The absolute monolithic weight of the reality he was about to face crashed down upon him. He finally realized that I was not a prosy housewife walking in to beg for mercy. I was a corporate executioner, and I had brought the entire guillotine with me. I did not break eye contact with him as I reached the plaintiff's table. I did not look at my mother or my sister in the gallery. I simply nodded to my lead associate. Unpack them, I commanded, my voice carrying clearly through the silent, electrified air of the courtroom. Let us show Mr. Sterling exactly what the bottom of the barrel looks like. The four associates moved with terrifying efficiency. The sharp, synchronized slaps of heavy black binders hitting the polished wood of the plaintiff's table echoed like gunfire in the cavernous room. They did not just bring documents. They brought exhibits, ledgers, bank statements, and high-resolution printed wire transfers. Within seconds, they had constructed a fortress of undeniable proof right in front of me. Behind me, the gallery erupted into a frantic, buzzing hive of whispers. Beatrice clutched Chloe's arm, her knuckles turning white as she stared at the sheer volume of legal firepower I had just unleashed. The country club socialites who had come to watch a slaughter suddenly looked distinctly uneasy. At the defense table, Harrison Davis was frantically pulling files from his briefcase, his hands trembling so badly he dropped a stack of manila folders onto the floor. Marcus sat entirely frozen. His eyes were wide and unblinking, locked onto the Apex Investment Group logo embossed in sharp silver foil on the side of every single banker's box. He was a man watching a tidal wave approach, knowing he was chained to the shore. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed, his voice cutting through the rising panic in the room. The heavy oak door behind the bench swung open, and the Honorable Judge Thomas Abernathy strode into the courtroom. He was a notoriously strict, no-nonsense veteran of the Superior Court bench, a man who possessed absolutely zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics or unprepared counsel. He took his seat at the elevated bench, adjusting his black robes, and picked up his wooden gavel. He struck the sounding block with a sharp, definitive crack. The room instantly fell into a dead, suffocating silence. "Be seated," Judge Abernathy commanded. He put on a pair of wire-rimmed reading glasses and picked up the docket sheet resting in front of him. "I see we have the Sterling matter before the court this morning." Harrison Davis immediately sprang to his feet. He was desperate. He needed to seize control of the narrative before I could utter a single word about the offshore accounts or the wire fraud. He smoothed his tie, puffed out his chest, and projected the loudest, most arrogant voice he could muster, attempting to play to his gallery of wealthy supporters. "Your Honor, we are respectfully requesting an immediate summary judgment in favor of my client, Marcus Sterling." Davis announced, his voice booming across the silent room. "We are asking the court to definitively strip the respondent Maya Sterling of all claims to marital assets, corporate holdings, and real estate properties. Furthermore, we request full sanctions against her for this absurd theatrical display." Davis pointed a trembling but accusatory finger at my table. "As you can clearly see, Your Honor, the respondent has completely lost her grip on reality. She is an uneducated, unrepresented homemaker who has dragged a mountain of irrelevant, unverified boxes into this courtroom in a desperate attempt to hijack these proceedings. She is wasting this court's valuable time. My client has made a more than generous settlement offer, which she violently destroyed during mediation. We request that you sign the order transferring all contested estates to my client immediately and dismiss this circus." I did not object. I did not raise my voice. I simply stood there, bathed in the ambient light filtering through the high courtroom windows. If a camera had been circling me in that exact moment, it would have captured a woman standing in the eye of a hurricane, perfectly still, perfectly lethal. I wore a faint, knowing smile. I let Davis dig his own grave, letting the silence stretch out after his desperate, arrogant speech. Judge Abernathy did not immediately respond. He lowered his gaze from Davis and looked down at the preliminary filings my lead associate had placed on the clerk's desk just moments before the judge entered. He picked up the top sheet of paper. He read the first line. The courtroom remained so quiet that you could hear the soft rustle of the heavy parchment as the judge turned the page. He read the second page. He stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. Judge Abernathy slowly lowered the documents to his desk. He reached up with slow, deliberate movements and took off his wire-rimmed glasses. The expression on his face shifted from routine judicial annoyance to absolute unadulterated shock. He looked at Harrison Davis, and then his eyes slowly shifted to lock directly onto me. The air in the room grew incredibly heavy. The temperature seemed to plummet. "Mr. Davis," Judge Abernathy said, his voice dangerously quiet, but echoing with a terrifying gravity. "Are you attempting to make a mockery of my courtroom?" Davis blinked, completely caught off guard by the judge's tone. "Your Honor, I am merely representing my client against a vexatious litigant who—" "Are you playing games with the court?" "Mr. Davis, Judge?" Abernathy interrupted, his voice rising into a sharp, commanding bark that made the lawyer physically flinch. "Look at the woman standing across the aisle from you. Look at her closely. Do you honestly mean to tell me that you do not recognize who she is?" Davis frowned, his eyes darting toward me. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead. He looked at my tailored suit, my perfectly composed posture, and the elite team of legal associates standing at attention behind me. The arrogant smirk finally melted off his face, replaced by the first creeping signs of genuine horror. "She is Maya Sterling, Your Honor." Davis stammered, his voice shrinking. "She is just a homemaker. She does not even have a law degree." Judge Abernathy let out a harsh, disbelieving scoff. He leaned far over the bench, resting both hands on the polished wood, glaring down at the defense table with absolute pity and disgust. "You are a fool, Mr. Davis," the judge stated, the words ringing out like a death sentence. "The woman standing before you is not Maya Sterling, the homemaker. Her maiden name is Maya Washington." The judge paused, letting the name echo through the cavernous space. "She is a former Supreme Court clerk who graduated at the absolute top of her class from Harvard Law." The judge continued, his voice booming with absolute authority. "But more importantly, Mr. Davis, she is the silent managing partner and the majority equity shareholder of Davis Vance and Associates." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that occurs right after a bomb detonates before the shockwave hits. "You are standing in my courtroom, aggressively demanding sanctions against a woman who literally owns the building you work in." Judge Abernathy stated, his tone dripping with lethal precision. "You are asking me to strip the assets of your ultimate boss. The firm whose name is on your paycheck belongs entirely to her." The heavy leather briefcase that Harrison Davis had been gripping slipped from his slick, sweating fingers. It hit the hardwood floor with a loud, violent crack that made the entire gallery jump. Davis stood completely paralyzed, his jaw hanging open, staring at me as if I had just risen from the dead. He had just spent the last week insulting, threatening, and attempting to bankrupt the woman who held his entire professional career in the palm of her hand. Next to him, Marcus Sterling physically recoiled. He stumbled backward, his expensive leather chair scraping loudly against the floor. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like he was going to pass out. He grabbed the edge of the table to keep himself from collapsing, his knuckles turning stark white. In the gallery behind them, Beatrice let out a strangled, horrific gasp. Chloe dropped her artisan coffee cup, the liquid splashing unheeded across her designer shoes. Preston, who had just minutes ago bragged about putting me at the bottom of the barrel, sat frozen with his mouth agape, looking like he had been struck by lightning. The entire courtroom held its breath. I finally stepped forward, resting my hands lightly on the polished wood of the plaintiff's table. I looked directly into Marcus's terrified, hollow eyes. "I believe opposing counsel has fundamentally misunderstood the power dynamic in this room." "Your Honor," I said, my voice smooth, calm, and echoing with absolute, unchallenged power. "If Mr. Davis is quite finished embarrassing himself, I would like to proceed with the asset seizure." Judge Abernathy nodded slowly. Davis practically melted into his chair. Judge Abernathy leaned back in his high leather chair, steepling his fingers together. "Proceed, counselor," he said, his voice a low rumble of absolute permission. Harrison Davis practically collapsed into his seat, burying his face in his hands. He pushed his chair as far away from Marcus as physically possible, attempting to distance himself from the toxic fallout. Marcus was left completely exposed, sitting rigidly at the defense table, while my associates moved with practiced efficiency. I gestured to my lead associate, who immediately handed a thick, bound folder to the bailiff. The bailiff passed it up to the judge, while another associate placed an identical folder directly in front of Marcus. Your Honor, we are not here today to divide marital assets, I stated, projecting my voice so that every single socialite and family member in the gallery could hear my words clearly. We are here because the respondent, Marcus Sterling, possesses no actual assets to divide. Sterling Financial Technology. The company he claims to have built from the ground up is entirely fraudulent. It is a house of cards constructed on stolen intellectual property. Marcus shot up from his chair. That is a lie, he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. I built that algorithm. I coded it myself. She is trying to steal my life's work. Mr. Sterling, sit down and remain silent, or I will have you removed and held in contempt. Judge Abernathy snapped, striking his gavel once. You will speak only when spoken to. Marcus swallowed hard, his face glistening with a cold sweat as he slowly lowered himself back into his chair. His chest heaved as he stared at the black folder sitting in front of him. I directed my attention back to the bench. If you turn to tab 3, Your Honor, you will find the original source code for the predictive market algorithm that serves as the foundation for Sterling Financial Technology. Marcus has spent the last 4 years telling investors, the media, and this very court that he is a visionary tech CEO who coded this software in our garage. He claimed it was the product of his own unique genius. I paused, letting my eyes drift over the gallery. Chloe and Beatrice looked physically ill, their perfect postures crumbling as they realized they were watching a public execution. The truth, Your Honor, is that Marcus Sterling barely knows how to write a basic HTML script. I continued, my voice dripping with icy disdain. He is not a genius CEO. He is a fraud and an intellectual property thief. I wrote every single line of that source code. I developed the algorithm during the first year of our marriage while he assumed I was merely playing games on my laptop. Recognizing its immense value, I registered the copyright and patented the software 5 years ago. I walked slowly toward the center of the room. I did not register it under my own name. I registered it under an anonymous holding company to protect it from my husband's chronic financial mismanagement. That company is Apex Holdings. I am the sole owner and acting managing partner of Apex. The courtroom was dead silent. The revelation hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Marcus was shaking his head back and forth, staring blankly at the documents in front of him. When Marcus decided to launch his fintech startup, he realized he lacked the technical capability to actually build the product he had pitched to investors. I explained, laying out his betrayal with surgical precision. So he broke into my encrypted servers, stole the proprietary source code, and illegally integrated it into his own platform. He then forged a licensing agreement between Apex Holdings and Sterling Financial to satisfy his venture capitalists, claiming he had secured the rights to use the software. I turned to face Marcus, my expression hard as granite. He did not know that I owned Apex Holdings. He simply thought he was stealing from a faceless corporate entity. He had absolutely no idea that the company he was defrauding, the creditor he was systematically lying to, was his own wife. Judge Abernathy adjusted his glasses, scrutinizing the documents. He flipped through the patent registrations, the time-stamped coding logs, and the forged licensing agreements. The paper trail was flawless. My team had spent months verifying every digital signature and every stolen file. This is an egregious violation, Mr. Sterling, the judge murmured, his voice vibrating with disgust. You actively pirated patented software and built an entire corporate entity on stolen property. We were married. Marcus pleaded, his voice high and desperate. He looked around the room, begging for a lifeline that did not exist. It is marital property. What is hers is mine. We built this life together. I did not even let the judge respond to that pathetic defense. I signaled my associate, who pulled a final document from the top box. Apex Holdings was formed with an inheritance left to me by my late grandfather. I stated, cutting off his final escape route. Under state law, assets purchased with inherited funds are strictly non-marital property. Apex and all of its intellectual property belong solely to me. Marcus illegally utilized my software without paying a single cent in licensing fees for 4 years. He enriched himself, bought luxury cars, and funded offshore accounts for his mistress, using revenue generated entirely by my stolen code. I looked up at the judge. Apex Holdings is formally calling in the debt, Your Honor. We are seeking immediate restitution for 4 years of unpaid licensing fees, copyright infringement, and punitive damages for corporate fraud. The total calculated liability comes to exactly $15 million. Marcus let out a strangled, choking sound. 15 million, he gasped, clutching his chest. I do not have $15 million. You know I do not have that. Judge Abernathy closed the folder and took off his glasses. He looked down at Marcus with the kind of absolute disdain reserved for the lowest class of criminals. You do not have a choice, Mr. Sterling. The judge declared, his voice booming with finality. The evidence presented today is irrefutable. You have engaged in massive intellectual property theft, forgery, and financial fraud. I am granting an immediate summary judgment in favor of the plaintiff. The judge picked up his pen and began signing the orders my team had prepared. Effective immediately, Marcus Sterling is stripped of his title as CEO of Sterling Financial Technology. 100% of your equity shares in the company are hereby seized and transferred to Apex Holdings to partially satisfy the outstanding debt. Furthermore, you are held personally liable for the remaining balance of $15 million. This court will authorize the immediate garnishment of any and all future earnings until this debt is paid in full. The sharp crack of the gavel hitting the sounding block echoed like a gunshot. It was over. Marcus was completely, utterly destroyed. He was no longer a millionaire tech CEO. He was a penniless, disgraced criminal staring down a lifetime of insurmountable debt. He sat slumped in his chair, his mouth hanging open, his eyes vacant and dead. Then the screaming started. In the second row of the gallery, Jasmine abruptly stood up. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged fury. She pushed past a terrified Beatrice and stormed toward the low wooden railing that separated the gallery from the courtroom floor. You lied to me! Jasmine shrieked, her voice echoing violently off the high ceilings. The entire courtroom turned to watch her meltdown. You told me you were rich. You told me you were a genius. You told me we were going to live in a mansion and have everything. Marcus flinched, slowly turning his head to look at his mistress. Jasmine, please, he begged, his voice cracking. I can fix this. Just give me time. Fix it! Jasmine screamed hysterically, tears of rage streaming down her face. You have nothing! You are a fraud! You gave me a house with a $2 million tax lien, and now you owe her $15 million. You are completely broke. You are worse than broke. You are going to drag me down with you. Jasmine, Marcus pleaded, reaching a shaking hand toward her. Think about our baby. Do not you dare talk about the baby, Jasmine snarled. She grabbed her left hand and violently yanked the massive 5-carat diamond ring off her finger. She drew her arm back and hurled the ring with all her strength directly at Marcus. The heavy platinum and diamond band flew across the room and struck Marcus squarely in the center of his forehead. He let out a sharp cry of pain, recoiling as the ring bounced off his skin and clattered onto the hardwood floor, spinning rapidly before coming to a dead stop right beside my expensive stilettos. Jasmine did not wait to see where it landed. I am done with you, she screamed at the top of her lungs. You are pathetic. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the courtroom, shoving the heavy mahogany doors open and disappearing down the hallway, leaving Marcus bleeding, humiliated, and entirely alone. I looked down at the glittering diamond resting on the floor near my feet. Then I looked up at the gallery. Beatrice was sobbing into her hands. Chloe and Preston sat in stunned, horrifying silence, their arrogant illusions shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The vultures had come to watch a feast, and instead they had witnessed their own golden boy get buried alive. I turned to my legal team and gave a curt, satisfied nod. We were done here. I turned back to gather my files, fully prepared to walk out of that courtroom and leave the ashes of Marcus Sterling behind me. But the absolute delusion of my family was a disease that ran much deeper than Marcus. A loud, violent crash echoed from the gallery. Preston had viciously kicked the low wooden gate that separated the spectator seating from the courtroom floor. His face was a mottled, furious shade of crimson. He could not stand it. He could not process the fact that a woman he considered beneath him, a woman who did not share his pedigree, had just systematically dismantled his entire worldview. Seeing his wife Chloe sobbing hysterically next to him had finally snapped his fragile, arrogant ego. "This is an absolute farce!" Preston roared, storming through the swinging wooden gate and marching directly onto the courtroom floor. "You cannot just steal a man's company because of some technicality. This is a kangaroo court, and I'm not going to stand here and watch my family be humiliated by a bitter, vindictive woman." Judge Abernathy stiffened. The sheer audacity of a gallery spectator storming the well of a federal courtroom was unprecedented. The judge slammed his gavel down so hard the sound cracked like a whip. "Sir, you will step back behind the bar immediately," Judge Abernathy commanded, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "You are not a party to this case. Return to your seat, or I will have you removed by force." Preston did not stop. He marched right up to the plaintiff table, slamming his hands down hard on the polished mahogany. He glared up at the judge, completely blinded by his own generational wealth and privilege. He truly believed the rules did not apply to him. "Do you know who I am?" Preston snarled, pointing a rigid finger at the bench. "I am Preston Kensington III. My family practically built this city. We fund the campaigns that put judges like you in those seats. You are going to reverse this absurd ruling right now, or I will make one phone call to the governor and ensure you never wear that robe again." The entire courtroom froze. My legal team stared at Preston as if he had just volunteered for his own execution. Beatrice gasped loudly, covering her mouth with trembling hands. Even Marcus, who was currently drowning in $15 million of debt, looked up in sheer terror at the sheer stupidity of his brother-in-law. Judge Abernathy did not yell. He did not blink. He simply placed his wooden gavel down and looked at Preston with the kind of cold, detached fury that ends careers. "Bailiff Judge Abernathy," said, his voice deadly calm and chillingly precise. "Take Mr. Kensington into custody. I am holding him in direct criminal contempt of court." Two armed bailiffs immediately stepped forward from the walls, unclipping the heavy metal handcuffs from their belts. Preston scoffed, waving them away as if they were pesky insects. "You cannot touch me," he spat, taking a step back but maintaining his arrogant posture. "I have the best lawyers in the state on retainer. My father plays golf with the district attorney. You lay a hand on me and the Kensington family will bury this entire courtroom." That was my cue. I picked up a thin blue folder from the bottom of my banker's box. I walked slowly around the table, cutting off Preston before he could retreat back to the gallery. "The Kensington family will not do a single thing to save you, Preston," I said, my voice slicing effortlessly through his arrogant tirade. Preston sneered at me, puffing out his chest to look physically intimidating. "You think you are so smart, Maya. You think taking down Marcus makes you a player. You are nothing but trash playing dress-up. When my father hears about this..." "Your father already knows," I interrupted smoothly, tossing the blue folder onto the table directly in front of him. It landed with a soft, definitive thud. Preston glanced down at the folder. The logo of a highly exclusive forensic accounting firm was embossed in silver on the cover. It was a firm that catered exclusively to old money estates, tracking generational wealth with ruthless efficiency. "What is this?" Preston demanded, his voice wavering for the very first time. His eyes darted from the folder to my face, searching for a bluff. "That is a complete audit of the Kensington Family Trust over the last 48 months, I explained, watching the color slowly drain from his cheeks. "When Chloe started buying designer bags, flying private to Paris, and acting like a billionaire socialite on the internet, I knew something was wrong. Your trust fund allowance is generous, Preston, but it is not that generous." Preston swallowed hard. He took a staggering step back, his eyes darting frantically toward the gallery. Chloe had stopped crying and was now watching us with wide, terrified eyes. "Shut up," Preston hissed, stepping toward me with his fists clenched. I did not shut up. I raised my voice, ensuring every single person in the gallery, especially Chloe's country club friends, heard exactly how fake their golden couple truly was. "You have been embezzling from your own family," I stated clearly, projecting my words to the back of the room. "You forged your father's signature on trust disbursements and siphoned over $4 million to fund Chloe's delusional social media lifestyle. You bought her silence and her affection with stolen money because you were too incompetent to make a name for yourself." "That is a lie," Chloe shrieked from the gallery, scrambling to her feet. Her face was pale, her voice shrill with panic. "Tell her she is lying, Preston. Tell her we are rich. Tell them we have the money." Preston could not speak. He was hyperventilating, staring at the blue folder as if it contained a live explosive. The arrogant swagger had vanished entirely. I felt it was my duty as a concerned family member to share my findings. I continued, my tone devoid of any sympathy. "So I had my legal team courier a duplicate copy of that exact audit to your father yesterday afternoon." Preston let out a strangled, horrific gasp. "You sent this to my father?" "I did," I smiled faintly, leaning slightly against the table. "And just to be absolutely certain, I had my associates monitor the Kensington estate filings this morning. It seems your father does not take kindly to thieves stealing from his legacy to fund a frivolous lifestyle. At 9 o'clock this morning, Preston Kensington II officially severed your access to the family trust. He froze your accounts, canceled your credit cards, and completely cut you out of his will." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. The buzzing gossip from the gallery had died instantly. The wealthy socialites who had fawned over Chloe moments ago were now looking at her with undisguised pity and disgust. "You are broke, Preston." I delivered the final devastating blow, my voice ringing with total finality. "You do not have the best lawyers in the state anymore. You do not have the district attorney on speed dial. You are just a common thief who just threatened a federal judge on the record." Preston's knees buckled. He stumbled backward, hitting the wooden railing hard. He looked at me, then at the furious judge, and finally at the two bailiffs who were now closing in on him. All of the unearned arrogance, the smug country club superiority, evaporated, leaving behind a pathetic, terrified little boy who had finally been caught. The bailiffs grabbed his arms, twisting them roughly behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed through the silent courtroom, sealing his fate. "No, wait!" Preston cried out, struggling against their firm grip, his voice cracking with desperation. "Let me call my father. Please, I just need to explain it to him. Let me call my father." "You can use your one phone call from the county jail," Mr. Kensington, Judge Abernathy stated coldly, pointing toward the side doors. "Remove him from my courtroom immediately." The bailiffs dragged Preston away. He was sobbing now, his expensive designer shoes dragging across the polished floor as he begged and pleaded for a family name that no longer protected him. The heavy doors swung shut behind him, cutting off his pathetic cries. In the gallery, the illusion shattered completely. Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream. The reality of her situation crashed down upon her with the weight of a collapsing building. She was not a wealthy socialite. She was not the envy of the family. She was married to a disinherited criminal, and she was entirely penniless. Her entire identity, constructed on stolen money and fake prestige, had just been burned to ash in front of everyone she wanted to impress. Her legs gave out beneath her. She collapsed onto the floor of the gallery, tangling in her expensive fuchsia dress. She slammed her fists against the hardwood, weeping uncontrollably, her perfectly applied makeup running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. The golden child facade she had maintained for her entire life was dead and buried. Beatrice dropped to her knees beside her favorite daughter, trying to comfort her, but Chloe violently pushed her own mother away, screaming incoherently about her ruined life and her stolen future. I stood at the plaintiff table, watching the chaos unfold with absolute calm. I had not laid a single hand on them. I had simply held up a mirror to their own greed, their own entitlement, and their own lies. They had destroyed themselves. Judge Abernathy struck his gavel one final time, dismissing the court. The sound echoed with a profound sense of finality. I did not look back at Marcus, who remained slumped at the defense table, staring blankly at the floor. I simply nodded to my lead associate, handed over my files, and turned to leave. The heavy mahogany doors swung open, and I stepped back out into the polished marble corridor of the Fulton County Superior Court. The atmosphere in the hallway had completely inverted. Just an hour ago, this space had been a red carpet for my arrogant family and their wealthy onlookers. Now it felt like the aftermath of a natural disaster. The country club socialites were huddled in small, tense groups, whispering frantically. Their eyes darted toward me as I walked past, parting like the Red Sea to give me a wide berth. Power commands respect, but absolute financial annihilation commands fear. I was halfway down the corridor heading toward the elevators when I heard the frantic clicking of heels echoing sharply behind me. "Maya, wait, please, Maya, wait." I stopped and turned around. Beatrice was practically sprinting down the hallway. Her pristine Chanel jacket was rumpled. Her perfect hair was slightly disheveled, and her pearl necklace bounced wildly against her chest. She looked entirely unhinged. The stoic, tragic mother routine she had played to perfection earlier had completely vanished. She reached me panting heavily and reached out to grab my arm. Her manicured fingers dug into the fabric of my suit. "Maya, my darling daughter," Beatrice cried, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. The fake tears flowed freely now, ruining her expensive mascara. "I knew it. I always knew you were the brightest one in this family. I always knew you were destined for greatness." I stared down at her hand, gripping my arm, feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound clinical detachment. "You have to believe me, Maya." Beatrice pleaded, her voice rising so her socialite friends could hear her desperately trying to align herself with the winner. "Marcus tricked me. He manipulated all of us. He lied to me about everything. He told me you were unstable, and I was just so worried about you. But we are blood, Maya. We are family. You have to help me fix this." I looked at the woman who had birthed me. The woman who had spent my entire life making me feel like an ugly, unwanted burden. She had stood by while Preston mocked me. She had laughed while Chloe insulted me. She had actively cheered for Marcus to strip me of everything I owned. And now, because I held the keys to a multi-billion-dollar empire, she was suddenly playing the role of the devoted, loving mother. "You need my help?" I asked, my voice perfectly level. "Yes," Beatrice gasped, nodding frantically. Her eyes were wide and desperate. "The media is going to be all over this. The scandal with Preston, the bankruptcy with Marcus. It is going to ruin our reputation. The country club board will ask me to step down. My sorority alumni association will completely ostracize me. You have to make a public statement, Maya. You have to tell them that you and I are united. You have to save my standing in the community." I looked down at her fingers, still clutching my sleeve. Slowly, deliberately, I reached over and peeled her hand off my arm. I did it with the careful precision of someone removing a crawling insect. Beatrice let her hand fall, her fake smile faltering as the temperature in the corridor seemed to drop by 10 degrees. "Save your standing," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "You really think this is about your country club memberships, Beatrice? You think this is about what your sorority sisters think of you?" "Maya, please," she stammered, taking a step back. "I am your mother. You cannot just leave me to deal with this mess. Marcus took all our liquid assets. We have nothing to fall back on." I took a slow, calculated step toward her. "Do you remember what you did 6 months ago, Beatrice? When Marcus first filed the fraudulent lawsuits against me? Do you remember how you funded his elite legal team?" Beatrice swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously. "I took out a loan," she whispered, "a mortgage on the family estate. It was just a temporary measure. Marcus promised he would pay it back double once he won the case and seized your assets. But you have so much money now, Maya. You can just pay off the bank. It is pocket change for a billionaire. You can save the family home." I tilted my head, studying her pathetic, desperate face. "I do not need to pay off the bank, Beatrice." She blinked, looking momentarily confused. "What do you mean?" "You did not borrow money from a traditional bank," I explained, my voice smooth and lethal. "You went to a private equity firm that specializes in high-risk, rapid approval bridging loans. A firm that did not ask too many questions about your lack of income because they secured the loan against the entire deed of the Kensington family estate." Beatrice's face lost all of its remaining color. Her breathing became shallow and erratic. "How do you know that?" "Because I own the private equity firm, Beatrice," I stated the truth, dropping like a guillotine blade. "Apex Holdings purchased your debt the very second you signed the paperwork. You did not mortgage your legacy to a bank. You mortgaged it to me." She let out a strangled, horrifying gasp. Her hands flew to her throat as if she were suffocating. You hold the deed." "I do," I confirmed. "And because Marcus just lost his entire company, and Preston is currently sitting in a holding cell, the collateral on that loan is entirely worthless. You are in default, Beatrice. You defaulted 30 days ago, but I graciously instructed my team to wait until this exact moment to execute the clause." "No," Beatrice whispered, shaking her head violently. "No, Maya, you cannot do this. That is my home. It is where you grew up. You cannot take my home." "I am not taking it," I corrected her coldly. "I am liquidating it." The foreclosure order was executed at exactly noon today. By the time you drove to this courthouse, the locks had already been changed. My private security firm is currently boxing up whatever cheap personal items you have left and leaving them on the curb. "Maya, please," Beatrice screamed, dropping to her knees right there in the middle of the marble hallway. She grabbed the hem of my suit pants, weeping hysterically. "I am your mother. Where am I supposed to go? I have no money. I have no house. Please, I am begging you. Do not do this to me." I looked down at her. The woman who had made my childhood a living hell was now groveling at my feet, begging for scraps from the daughter she had always despised. It was the ultimate victory, but I felt no joy. I just felt clean. The toxic infection that had plagued my entire life was finally purged. "You made your choice a long time ago, Beatrice," I said, my voice carrying clearly down the silent corridor. "You wanted Marcus to be the golden son. You worshipped him. You funded him. You believed in his supremacy so much that you bet your entire life on his success. So I suggest you go find him. Let the son you always wanted put a roof over your head." I stepped back, pulling my suit free from her grasping hands. I turned and walked away, the sharp clicks of my heels echoing off the marble. I did not look back. Behind me, Beatrice remained kneeling on the floor, sobbing into her hands. She slowly turned her head, looking desperately toward the group of wealthy socialites who had accompanied her to the courthouse. She reached a trembling hand out toward them, begging for a sympathetic shoulder, pleading for the high society support system she had valued above her own flesh and blood. The women stared at her. They looked at the ruined makeup, the rumpled clothes, and the undeniable stench of poverty and public disgrace now clinging to her. In the brutal, unforgiving world of old money, a bankrupt, humiliated woman was entirely radioactive. One by one, the socialites turned their backs. They picked up their designer purses, adjusted their silk scarves, and walked away in the opposite direction, leaving Beatrice completely alone, trapped in the very bottom of the barrel she had designed for me. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. The heavy metal doors slid shut, severing my connection to that family forever. I took a deep breath of the cool, conditioned air. For the first time in my entire life, the air tasted like freedom. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed my lead associate. "Yes, Ms. Washington," the associate answered immediately. "The trial is over," I said, a genuine smile finally touching my lips. "Call the pilot. Have the jet fueled and ready for departure. We are going back to headquarters. It is time to get back to work." "Understood, Ms. Washington." I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The elevator descended smoothly, rapidly, leaving the past behind. I was no longer the unwanted daughter. I was no longer the uneducated housewife. I was Maya Washington, the architect of my own empire, and my reign had only just begun. The elevator descended with a smooth, mechanical hum, pulling me further away from the wreckage I had just engineered. I watched the digital floor numbers tick downward, each glowing red digit acting as a countdown to the rest of my life. For years I had existed in the shadows, deliberately shrinking myself to fit into a space they deemed acceptable. I had worn the mask of the quiet, compliant housewife while secretly building a financial monolith. I had allowed them to insult me, degrade me, and underestimate me because I knew that their arrogance was the very tool I would eventually use to dismantle them. The charade was finally over. The heavy metal doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the grand foyer of the Fulton County Superior Court. The vaulted ceilings and polished marble columns normally felt imposing, but today they felt like a victory corridor. I walked across the sprawling lobby, my footsteps echoing with a steady rhythmic authority. I was not rushing, I was not hiding. I walked with the deliberate, measured pace of a conqueror claiming her territory. A few lingering reporters and legal aides turned to watch me pass, sensing the undeniable shift in gravity that accompanied my presence. They did not know my name yet, but by the end of the business day, my face would be on the front page of every major financial publication in the world. I reached the massive brass and glass entrance doors. I placed both hands on the cool metal handles and pushed them open, stepping out of the shadowed halls of justice. The transition was physical and absolute. The harsh, brilliant sunlight washed over me, instantly warming my skin and blinding me for a fraction of a second. I paused at the top of the wide concrete steps, letting the fresh air fill my lungs. The oppressive, suffocating weight of the Sterling and Kensington families was gone, completely burned away in the inferno of their own making. I stood at the top of the steps, looking down at the street below. If a camera had been tracking my movement, it would have slowly pulled back, right then capturing a woman standing alone at the pinnacle of her triumph, bathed in brilliant natural light perfectly framed against the monolithic architecture of the courthouse. Waiting for me at the bottom of the steps was not a rideshare or a modest sedan. It was a synchronized display of absolute corporate power. A convoy of 3 pristine jet-black SUVs idled silently at the curb, their tinted windows gleaming in the sun. A team of 6 elite private security contractors dressed in immaculate dark suits and communication earpieces stood at rigid attention, forming a protective perimeter around the vehicles. As I descended the stairs, my lead security director, a towering man with sharp, observant eyes, stepped forward. He gave a crisp, respectful bow and pulled open the heavy armored door of the lead vehicle. "Good afternoon, Madam Chairman," he said, his voice deferential but entirely professional. "The executive board is assembled, and the press conference is ready for your arrival." Just as I reached the vehicle, a loud commotion erupted near the side entrance of the courthouse. I paused, resting my hand on the edge of the open car door, and turned to look. 2 federal agents were aggressively pushing through a side exit, dragging a man between them. It was Marcus. The tailored navy pinstripe suit he had worn like a suit of armor just hours ago was now disheveled and ruined. His jacket was missing, his tie was ripped half off, and his hands, the same hands that had signed the forged documents and stolen my life's work, were locked tightly in heavy steel handcuffs behind his back. His face was a mask of pure terror and absolute devastation. A swarm of local news photographers and aggressive journalists who had caught wind of the spectacular courtroom collapse were already rushing toward him. Their camera flashes burst rapidly in the daylight, creating a chaotic strobe effect around his humiliated face. Reporters shouted aggressive questions at him, demanding answers about the $15 million judgment, the stolen source code, and the total liquidation of his company. Marcus tried to hide his face, turning his head away from the merciless camera lenses, but there was nowhere left to hide. He was being hauled into a federal transport van, facing years in prison for massive financial fraud and corporate theft. His fraudulent empire was dead, and he was going down with it publicly and painfully. I watched him for one long final second, feeling absolutely no pity. He had built his entire existence on a foundation of theft and arrogance, and gravity had finally collected its due. I turned away from the pathetic display and slid into the plush leather seat of the SUV. The heavy door closed, shutting out the noise of the flashing cameras and the shouting reporters with a solid, reassuring thud. Inside the cabin, it was completely silent, an insulated, luxurious fortress. My lead associate handed me an encrypted tablet showing the live feed of the Apex Holdings corporate headquarters. The massive auditorium was packed with national financial media waiting for me to step to the podium and officially claim my title as chairman of the board. I smoothed the lapels of my charcoal suit, adjusting my cuffs, and preparing to introduce Maya Washington to the world. The driver put the vehicle in gear, and the convoy smoothly pulled away from the curb, leaving the courthouse and the shattered remnants of my former life shrinking in the rearview mirror. As the city skyline stretched out before me, bathed in golden sunlight, a profound sense of clarity settled over my mind. They called me a failure. They called me a stain on their perfect pedigree. They looked at my quiet demeanor, my lack of expensive designer labels, and my unending patience, and they assumed I was weak. They thought I was an uneducated burden. They truly believed I was a black sheep, easily exploited, manipulated, and eventually discarded when I no longer served their grand purpose. They thought they could break me and step over my ruins to elevate themselves. But in life, those who are blinded by their own arrogance always forget one fundamental truth. A black sheep is sometimes not the weakest in the flock. Sometimes the black sheep is a wolf in sheep's clothing, patiently sharpening its teeth, just waiting for the chain to snap. The motorcade merged onto the highway, accelerating toward the towering glass skyscrapers of the financial district. I looked out the tinted window at the vast, sprawling city that I now functionally controlled. The sky above was an endless, brilliant blue, completely devoid of clouds, a new horizon stretching out infinitely before me. I leaned back into the soft leather seat, breathing in the scent of absolute victory. The shadows were gone. The sun was shining. The screen faded to a sharp, absolute black.